every automation starts with a single cluck, click, and that's why so many automations start with a form. Forms are one of the most common ways to set a workflow into motion. They gather all of the necessary information and ensure it's passed along to the right place. Forms in Rewst are not very different from other forms that you would use in real life. Might ask for your first name, your last name, maybe your social security number, which we will not be doing in this video, and Rewst is very similar. You have text fields, you have drop downs where you can choose from a list, but there are three key features that really bring your forms to life: field conditions, dynamic options, and embeddable links. So let's head over to the form builder and take a look at these three features. From the dashboard, we can go over to automations and forms. This is where all of our existing forms will live, and we can of course go over to the plus button at the top right to click add. We can simply come here and add a new name, something like form test, and hit submit. And this gives us our form editor. This is where we can see all of the different options on the left. We simply drag and configure them on the right. So this is our form editor. At the top left, we can tweak the name if we'd like to. We can add a description. On the top right, we can of course preview our form. We can view usages and we can save our form. And then the left-hand side here is our utility belt, kind of like Batman, where we have our different fields available: text, markdown, dropdown, multi-select, checkbox, etc. So you can create a variety of different forms here. And then of course, once the fields are on the form, we can configure them with some of those options that I talked about earlier. So let's grab some of these fields and then take a look at those options that show up, starting with the text and markdown field. This will simply show some placeholder text, and it will give us an editor where we can add some markdown. If you're not familiar with markdown, it's a simple formatting language that allows you to do things like headings, using asterisks for bold or underlines for things like italics. It can make formatting a whole lot easier, and this gives you the ability to do that. Next, we have our dropdown field, our multi-select, checkbox, and radio buttons. All these fields allow users to choose from a variety of options, and they are especially useful for triggering multiple workflow events based on what is chosen. One of the ways that happens is through the use of what are called options generators, which we'll talk about in another video. Next, we have text input and multi-line input. These are essentially for allowing a user to add their thoughts, short or long. For example, if you want additional comments or additional information, if you're building a feedback form, something along those lines. We have the number input, scrolling down here. The number input is essentially for capturing just numbers. So phone numbers, for example, or that social security number. And lastly, we have date. Bring that all the way down here. This is going to give you a date picker where you can choose a specific date for your form, and the file upload, which I don't need to drag to the canvas here, but you know what that's for. It's for uploading a file. Now that we've looked at the actual fields, let's take a look at the configurations for the actual field settings. So I'm going to scroll back up here to my drop down because this gives us the most options. Whoop! On this side now, and we start with the field name and the field label. Now, this can be a point of confusion for some people, so let me just make this very, very clear. The field name is going to be what you can use in your automation to capture information from the form. So you can think of a field name as a variable. So for example, if I was using this drop down to capture, let's say, manager information, who's your manager? I could simply change this field name to something like hiring manager. And because it is a variable, I have that underscore there, but the way to reference this field in an actual workflow would be to use ctx dot, in this case, hiring manager. Now, the difference between this and the field label is the field label will actually be the plain English that I will see on the form itself. So if I wanted to make it very clear that this is where you choose your hiring manager, I could change the field label to say hiring manager in normal English. And once I've done that, I will see in the form it has changed the field label. Of course, from here you can add a field description as well. So I can update this field to say select your hiring manager here. Next, we have a slew of checkbox options that can give us a lot more to work with here. So first is required. Unless the field is completely optional, you probably want to have this checked. What this will essentially mean in practice is if someone submits a form and a required field has not been filled out, it's not going to let them submit the form. So I can select required here. This is especially important if you absolutely need this information for the automation to run that you're connecting this form to. Next, we have a hidden option, and the hidden option essentially allows you to hide the field unless a condition is set. And we'll talk about field conditions options here in a second. Next, we have auto populate, which essentially allows you to automatically populate the field if there's only one option, for example. Next, we'll see allow custom input. Now, allow custom input makes it so whoever's filling out the form can add something unique. Of course, you'll need to make sure your workflow is expecting this or can handle this. But if there's an instance where you have a drop-down list and none of those are correct, maybe you're missing a hiring manager or you just hired a hiring manager and it's not updated in the system yet, this could be something that allows someone to add that custom option. Now, just keep in mind, this custom input will not be added to the list for future reference. It's not storing that information. It's just allowing them a one-time option to include an additional option. And we also have always skip cache. Always skip cache is related to dynamic options here, which I'll talk about here in a second. But if you choose this and dynamic options is not turned on, it's not really going to do anything. This is specifically for when you are using an options generator, and you can choose to run that workflow every single time the form comes up, or you can store that information in the cache to speed things up. All right, now jumping down to set field conditions. Set field conditions allows you to determine an action based on a condition for the specific field. What do I mean by that? If I click on this, you'll see I can add a condition or a Jinja condition. We're going to ignore Jinja condition for now. If I click on add condition, my default options are to select a dependent field and then choose to do something based on what is filled out in that field. So let me walk through this example. If I pull up these radio buttons here at the top to determine whether or not you are the hiring manager, I can edit this field and do something very, very simple, right? I can say something like hiring manager for one of the options and employee for another option, and I can remove this placeholder. Now what I can do is I can come back into this field, I can click on select field conditions, I can click add condition, and now I can say, if I choose the radio buttons field, that if they are the employee, then I'm going to show this field, and then I'll set that condition here. All right, next up we have dynamic options. So if I scroll down a little bit here, I am back on my drop-down field, and this is going to be one of the most important things for drop-down fields. What dynamic options allows us to do is instead of having to add manual options here to choose from, you can choose to dynamically pull information from whatever system that information belongs to. So for example, if you are storing hiring manager information in your PSA, you can use dynamic options to pull that information and make it visible here without having to add anything outside of your normal process. Versus if I were to do it manually, I would have to come in and edit the form every single time there was a change with the hiring managers. So I could simply click on this toggle here, and you can choose integration and resource. You'll actually see this, by the way, with a lot of crates that you might be using. You set up a crate, some of those pre-built automations that we have with Rewst. Many of the drop-down fields are straight up pulling information from your integrations using this workflow generated option. All right, and finally, what we can do is we can also embed the form within an iframe. So there are two ways that you can do this. And to actually see this in action, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at an existing form. All right, so I very quickly jumped over here to another form for tracking Steam game discounts. This is one of my favorite crates on the platform if you haven't seen some of my other videos. So anyway, if you come up here to the view usages section right next to save, this is where you can see the dynamic form URL, and it says view direct URL here. You could simply copy this link and add it into an iframe. This is one of the ways that you can do this. And I can also get this from the workflow canvas as well, where you set up the actual form trigger. And voila, you are now set up to build any number of different forms that can help you in your automation journey with Rewst. To get more information on this or more practice, you can check out our Rewst 102 through 104 videos, or you can take a look at our options generator video here. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you all in the next one.